In October of 1717, a merchant captain anchored off the coast of Delaware Bay went to sleep believing the next morning would be ordinary. He had made this route 100 times. He knew these waters. He was wrong. When the sun rose, there was a ship on the horizon. Small, fast, black flag. Before his crew could react, before a single cannon could be loaded, the vessel was alongside them. What happened next took less than 12 minutes. By the time it was over, the merchant captain had surrendered everything. His cargo, his dignity, his will to resist. Not because he was overwhelmed by firepower, not because the crew was outnumbered, but because of fear. Fear so complete, so carefully engineered, that fighting back never even felt like an option. The ship that did this had no name that history cares to remember. It wasn't the Queen Anne's Revenge, the 40-gun fortress we all know. It wasn't massive. It wasn't famous. It wasn't supposed to matter. It was a small sloop, a stolen sloop, and it was called the Revenge. We talk about the Queen Anne's Revenge like it made Blackbeard. We talk about the 40 guns, the blockades, the smoke in his beard, the legend. But here is what every documentary, every film, every textbook gets wrong. Edward Teach was not born a monster. He was trained into one. And the classroom was the Revenge. Today on Bilge Bound, we are going deeper than anyone has gone before. We are not just telling you about a ship. We are dissecting how one small sloop became the most terrifying psychological weapon in the history of the Caribbean. We are going to show you the dark modifications Teach made that no historian talks about in polite company. We are going to walk you through the raids, the ones where nobody fired a single shot, and explain exactly why grown men handed over everything they owned to a crew of 20 pirates on a ship smaller than most of their own. We are going to follow the intelligence network, yes, network, that Teach built from the deck of the Revenge. And at the end, we are going to answer the question that maritime historians have been quietly arguing about for 300 years. What really happened to the Revenge after Blackbeard was done with it? Because the official story, the one everyone repeats, it doesn't add up. Stay with me, because this is the ship that made the devil. To understand the Revenge, you have to start with the man who built it, and the man who stole it. And this is where the story becomes genuinely extraordinary. Because the origin of the most feared ship in the Caribbean begins not with a hardened pirate, not with a naval mutiny, not with a desperate escape from prison. It begins with a midlife crisis. His name was Stede Bonnet. And Stede Bonnet was, by every available historical account, the last man on Earth who should have become a pirate. He was a wealthy Barbadian landowner, a gentleman, a man of property, of standing, of social respectability. He had a plantation, he had servants, he had a wife, and by several historical accounts, that wife was a significant part of the problem. In 1717, Stede Bonnet did something that had never been done before in the history of Caribbean piracy. He did not steal a ship. He bought one. He walked into a shipyard, reportedly with his own money, and commissioned a 10-gun sloop. He named it the Revenge. And then, with absolutely no naval experience, no sailing expertise, and no understanding of what he was getting himself into, Stede Bonnet sailed out of Barbados to become a pirate. Now, in the pirate world, this was almost comedically wrong. You don't buy a ship. You take one. You earn one. You survive long enough to captain one. Purchasing your own vessel and announcing you're a pirate was the nautical equivalent of walking into a prison yard in a business suit and announcing you were a gangster. The real pirates of Nassau, men who had clawed their way up through violence and survival, looked at Stede Bonnet and saw exactly what he was. An amateur. A wealthy fool with a magnificent ship. And one man in particular saw something else entirely. He saw potential. Edward Teach arrived in Nassau sometime in 1716. We don't know exactly when. We don't know exactly where he came from. The historical record on Teach before his piracy years is deliberately vague, and some historians believe that vagueness was intentional. That Teach himself obscured his origins as part of his psychological warfare. What we know is this: he had sailed under the notorious privateer Benjamin Hornigold. He had learned. He had watched. He had studied how fear worked, how a captain who looked invincible could make an entire crew believe they were. When Teach and Bonnet crossed paths in Nassau, the power dynamic was established instantly. Bonnet had the ship. Teach had the vision. By most accounts, Teach essentially took command of the Revenge through sheer force of personality. Some historians describe it as a partnership, others describe it as a takeover. But here is what every account agrees on. The moment Edward Teach stepped onto the deck of the Revenge, the ship changed. Not physically, not yet, but in purpose. Bonnet had built a toy. Teach had found a weapon. And this is where the real story begins. Because what Teach saw in the Revenge was something that most captains of the era completely missed. Every pirate captain in the Caribbean in 1717 wanted the same thing: a bigger ship, more guns, more crew, more firepower. That was the conventional wisdom. Teach rejected it entirely. He looked at the Revenge, this small 10-gun sloop, and he saw what it could do that a massive man of war couldn't. He saw its draft, how shallow it sat in the water. He saw its speed, how quickly it could accelerate, change direction, disappear. He saw the geography of the Caribbean, the shallow inlets, the narrow channels, the sandbars that would rip the hull off a British frigate. And he made a decision that would define the next 18 months of maritime history. He would not chase the biggest ship. He would become the ghost ship. The ship nobody could catch. The ship nobody could predict. The ship that appeared out of nowhere and was gone before anyone could respond. The Revenge was not Blackbeard's flagship. It was his laboratory. And what he built inside that laboratory, the tactics, the psychology, the terror, those were the weapons that would eventually make him the most feared pirate in history. The moment Teach had effective command of the Revenge, he began changing it. And what he changed tells us everything about how this man's mind worked. Most pirate captains, when they captured a new ship, did one thing. They added guns, more cannons, heavier cannons. Cannons on every surface they could bolt them to. Teach did the opposite. Teach ordered the removal of everything he considered unnecessary weight. Bonnet had decorated the Revenge the way a wealthy gentleman decorates a yacht. Fine wood. Comfortable quarters. The kind of fittings you'd find on a ship where the owner expected to live comfortably. All of it went overboard. Furniture. Decorative fittings. Excess stores. Any luxury that added weight without adding capability. Why? Because every pound of unnecessary weight raised the ship's draft, how deep it sat in the water. And draft, in the shallow channels of the Bahamas and the Carolina coast, was the difference between escape and capture. A British Navy man of war, the most powerful warship of the era, drew 15 to 18 feet of water. The Revenge, stripped down and running light, drew maybe 6. Do you understand what that means? It means Teach could sail the Revenge into inlets, coves, and channels where no Navy vessel could follow. It means he could disappear into geography. It means the entire might of the British Royal Navy, every gun, every sailor, every commission issued to bring him down, was useless the moment he found shallow water. He wasn't just making his ship faster, he was making his ship invisible. This is the one that historians underreport. And it is, in many ways, the most important modification Teach made. He didn't rely on cannons to win fights. He relied on what happened before the cannons fired. Teach understood something fundamental about human psychology. People are not rational under sudden, extreme stress. When a merchant crew, men who signed up to transport goods, not fight pirates, saw a black flag on the horizon, their rational minds began shutting down. They didn't calculate odds. They didn't assess the enemy's firepower. They didn't make strategic decisions. They felt fear. Raw, instinctive, biological fear. And Teach's entire operation was designed to weaponize that fear before a single shot was fired. On the Revenge, Teach began perfecting what historians call the display of force, the theatrical presentation of violence. He experimented with his own appearance. The slow-burning cannon matches woven through his beard. The multiple pistols across his chest, far more than any man could practically fire in a single engagement. The great coat, the posture. He was not dressing up. He was building a character so terrifying, so inhuman in appearance that the psychological warfare began the moment enemy sailors raised their telescopes and saw him standing on the deck of the Revenge. This is where things get genuinely disturbing. Teach did not invent the naval grenade. But on the Revenge, he perfected its tactical use, and the way he used it tells you exactly what kind of mind he had. The grenado, or grenado in period spelling, was a hollowed iron sphere, roughly the size of a large apple, filled with gunpowder, mixed with scrap metal, mixed with broken glass, sealed and fitted with a short fuse. Standard pirates of the era used them as weapons of last resort, thrown into groups of defenders during a boarding action. Teach used them differently. On the Revenge, the standing order before any boarding action was this: the grenados go first. Not the cannons, not the muskets, not the swordsmen. The grenades. They were thrown onto the enemy deck before the first Revenge crewmen climbed the rail. And the goal was not primarily to kill. The goal was to create a scene of such sudden, spectacular, overwhelming carnage, fire, smoke, screaming, blood, that any will to resist in the surviving defenders was destroyed before the fight began. Teach understood that a man who watched his shipmates killed and maimed in an instant was not going to fight effectively. He was going to freeze. He was going to beg. He was going to surrender. This is the military concept of shock and awe, applied 300 years before the term was invented. The Revenge was not just a ship. It was a carefully designed machine for the rapid, systematic destruction of the human will to resist. And on every merchant vessel that saw that black sail appear on the horizon in 1717, it worked. October 1717. The Caribbean had heard rumors of the ship with the black flag. Rumors of a sloop so fast no one had been able to track it. Of a captain who appeared out of nowhere and vanished into shallow water before anyone could respond. But rumors are easy to dismiss. October 1717 was the moment the rumors became legend. Off the coast of Delaware Bay, the Revenge had been running for days. Teach had a target. Actually, he had two. Two merchant vessels, the Anne and the Lady, sitting peacefully at anchor in the late afternoon calm. Both were cargo ships. Both were lightly armed, as merchant vessels typically were. Both had crews who had not signed up for a fight. What happened next has been described in historical records as almost supernaturally efficient. Teach did not charge. He circled. He kept the Revenge at a distance, just outside the effective range of the merchant's small defensive cannons. Close enough to be seen clearly, far enough to be safe. He flew the flag, not the skull and crossbones that popular culture has made famous. That version came later. The 1717 flag was different, darker, more primitive. A black background with a symbol designed to communicate one thing above all else: we are not here to negotiate. He waited. He let the merchant crews watch him. Let them see the sloop moving with confidence and precision. Let them see the crew, prepared and disciplined, going about their positions. Let them see the black flag in the wind. He waited until the afternoon sun dropped to the western horizon directly behind the Revenge, directly in the eyes of the merchant sailors watching him. And then he moved. What followed was not a sea battle. It was a demonstration. The Revenge crossed the distance between itself and the two merchant ships with terrifying speed. By the time the merchant crews had finished shouting warnings and loading what guns they had, the Revenge was alongside the first vessel. The grenades went first, then the smoke. Then the screaming figure in the black coat, outlined against fire and chaos with burning fuses in his hair and a voice like something from the deep ocean. The Anne surrendered in 9 minutes. The Lady in 4. Not a single member of the Revenge's crew was seriously injured. 12 minutes of engagement, 2 ships taken, thousands of pounds worth of cargo, and a reputation that would spread from Delaware Bay to the Caribbean in days. But here is what the standard telling of this story always leaves out. And this is where the Revenge stops being just a pirate ship and becomes something else entirely. After the cargo was secured, after the merchant crews were gathered on deck, Teach did not immediately leave. He stayed. He talked. Not to threaten, not to intimidate, or rather, not only to intimidate. He interrogated. Every captured captain went through the same process. What route did you take? What was the weather like off Hatteras 3 days ago? Were there Navy vessels in Delaware Bay? Which ports are being watched? Which are not? How many guns does the escort frigate carry? What time does it leave harbor? Teach was building something, not just a treasure chest. A map, a living, constantly updated intelligence map of the entire Atlantic seaboard. Who was patrolling where, which routes were safe, which ports were unguarded, which merchant convoys were scheduled and when. Every merchant captain he captured added another layer. Every answered question made Teach more dangerous. By the end of 1717, Edward Teach had something no other pirate possessed. He knew the ocean better than the Navy did. He knew the patrol schedules, the blind spots, the windows of opportunity. The Revenge was not just a ship, it was the most sophisticated intelligence-gathering operation in the history of Caribbean piracy. We need to stop here because I want you to truly understand what Edward Teach was doing in 1717 from the deck of the Revenge. This is not a story about violence. This is a story about the avoidance of violence. Counterintuitive? Yes. But think about what violence costs a pirate captain. It costs lives, his own crew's lives, which are difficult and expensive to replace. It costs time. Every fight is a fight that could attract attention, bring Navy ships, end everything. It costs ships, damaged rigging, holed hulls, broken masts. Repairs take time and resources. The ideal pirate raid, the perfect pirate raid, results in total surrender without a single shot fired. And Edward Teach, more than any pirate before or after him, understood how to manufacture that perfect outcome. Every single decision about the Revenge, the stripped hull for speed, the shallow draft for escape, the grenades for shock, the theatrical appearance, all of it served one goal: make the calculation so clear, so obvious, so overwhelmingly one-sided that the enemy decided on their own that fighting was irrational. This is behavioral economics applied to maritime piracy in 1717. Teach was not the biggest, most heavily armed pirate in the Caribbean. He was the most convincing one. He sold the idea of his own invincibility so effectively that his victims bought it, completely every time before the first cannon was ever loaded. Let me give you a specific example that illustrates exactly how this worked. In November of 1717, the Revenge overtook a merchant vessel called the Margaret off the coast of North Carolina. The Margaret had 18 crew. The Revenge had 22. On paper, this was a fair fight, possibly a fight the Margaret could have won. The Margaret surrendered without resistance. Its captain, a man named Henry Bostock, was later interviewed by colonial authorities. His explanation for why he didn't fight? There seemed no point. There seemed no point. Not we were outgunned. Not we were outnumbered. There seemed no point. That is the psychological operation of the Revenge, expressed in 4 words by a man who experienced it firsthand. Teach had made resistance seem not dangerous but irrational. Pointless. Like arguing with gravity, that is a level of psychological mastery that most military commanders never achieve. And Teach learned it on the Revenge. He practiced it, refined it, tested it with every raid, and by the time he was done, he had turned it into an art form. By late 1717, something had changed. The Revenge was too famous. Not in the way Teach wanted, not anonymous, not invisible. Every governor from Virginia to Barbados had its description. Every Navy patrol in the Atlantic had orders. The ghost ship had been seen too many times, but more importantly, Teach had outgrown it. He had spent 18 months on the Revenge, learning everything a ship and its waters could teach him. He had built the tactics, the reputation, the intelligence network. He was ready for the next phase. He needed a fortress, not a shadow. In November of 1717, near the island of St. Vincent in the eastern Caribbean, the Revenge intercepted a ship that would change everything. La Concorde, a 300-ton French slave ship, 14 guns, a crew of 75, and a cargo hold that had carried hundreds of enslaved people across the Atlantic. Most accounts describe the capture of La Concorde as Teach's greatest tactical achievement to that point. Because La Concorde should have been able to fight back, it was larger. It was more heavily armed. It had more crew. But Teach used the Revenge in the exact way he had spent 18 months perfecting. He was fast. He was unpredictable. He struck the rudder first, a precise, devastating shot that left the massive ship unable to maneuver. And then the flag went up, and the grenades went, and the smoke rose, and the figure in the black coat appeared at the rail of the Revenge. La Concorde surrendered. No broadside exchange. No prolonged engagement. The psychological infrastructure that Teach had built on the Revenge, every raid, every captured captain, every carefully engineered moment of terror had culminated in the capture of a ship that should have beaten him. He renamed La Concorde, Queen Anne's Revenge, mounted 40 cannons on her, and became a legend. But what happened to the Revenge? This is the question. The official historical account says that Teach gave the ship, somewhat contemptuously, back to Stede Bonnet. The gentleman pirate, who had been reduced to a passenger on his own vessel, was handed back his property and sent on his way. A few months later, Bonnet was captured, tried, and hanged in Charlestown. The Revenge, by most accounts, was broken up or left to rot. End of story. Except, here is what bothers historians who look closely at the timeline. The Revenge disappears from the historical record with remarkable convenience at exactly the moment Teach is building his new identity as the fearsome Blackbeard. No confirmed destruction. No eyewitness account of the ship being burned or broken. Just gone. One school of thought holds that Teach burned it himself. Not to hide evidence of his crimes, pirates were not overly concerned about evidence, but to erase the origin, to destroy the training ground. Because the man who was about to become the most feared pirate in history did not want anyone to be able to study how he had learned. He wanted the legend to begin with the Queen Anne's Revenge, fully formed, fully terrifying, no apprenticeship, no humble sloop, just Blackbeard. If that theory is correct, if Teach deliberately destroyed the Revenge to control his own mythology, then it is perhaps the most remarkable detail in this entire story. It means the ship that taught him everything, he burned precisely because it taught him everything. It means the ghost ship was made invisible twice, once by its shallow draft and narrow inlets, and once by the hand of the man it created. 3330-3800. Chapter 6, What the Revenge Tells U.S. About Blackbeard. Joule, split screen. The small sloop on the left, the Queen Anne's Revenge on the right. Then the left screen fades to black, leaving only the flagship. Grand, ominous, the score of a historical epic. Here is the argument I want to leave you with. The standard narrative of Blackbeard focuses on the Queen Anne's Revenge. 40 guns. 4 ships. The blockade of Charleston. The final battle in Ocracoke Inlet. And that narrative treats Blackbeard as if he arrived fully formed, a monster who simply appeared in the Caribbean and began terrorizing the Atlantic. That is not what happened. Blackbeard was built. He was engineered. And the engineering happened on the Revenge over 18 months in a process that was methodical, intelligent, and deeply deliberate. Every element of the Blackbeard legend traces back to lessons learned on that small sloop. The theatrical appearance? Tested on the Revenge, on merchant crews who needed to be convinced of his invincibility. The use of speed over firepower? Perfected on the Revenge, in channels where Navy frigates couldn't follow. The intelligence network? Built on the Revenge, one captured captain at a time. The psychological warfare, the deliberate creation of fear as a weapon, developed on the Revenge, across dozens of raids where the goal was never violence for its own sake, but the total, efficient elimination of the will to resist. Blackbeard did not become Blackbeard when he renamed La Concorde. He became Blackbeard somewhere in a narrow Carolina inlet, on a stripped-down 10-gun sloop, the second time a merchant ship surrendered to him without firing a shot. That was the moment he understood what he was capable of. That was the moment the legend began. There is a final detail I want to share with you. When Edward Teach was finally killed in November 1718 in Ocracoke Inlet, in a battle that required a specially commissioned Royal Navy expedition to pull off, his killers counted the wounds on his body. 5 musket balls, 20 sword cuts, 25 separate wounds. And he kept fighting. The sailors who killed him, hardened Navy men, were reportedly shaken by what they saw. Not just by the number of wounds, but by the way Teach moved through the battle. Disciplined, deliberate, like a man who had planned for every contingency, even dying. That man, the man who could absorb 25 wounds and keep commanding, keep fighting, keep thinking, was not born. He was made. He was made on the Revenge. And the ship that made him has been sitting at the bottom of history, uncelebrated and largely forgotten, while the legend it created towers over 3 centuries of maritime mythology. Every great story has an origin. Every legend has the moment before the legend. Every monster has the classroom where it learned to be a monster. We remember the Queen Anne's Revenge because it is impossible not to. 40 guns, a blockaded city, a name that sounds like something from a myth. But the ship that deserves our attention, the ship that changed maritime history, is the one we almost lost. Small, fast, deliberately stripped of everything unnecessary. A 10-gun sloop with a name that Stede Bonnet chose and Edward Teach earned. The Revenge. We spend our lives looking at the biggest sails on the horizon and assuming they carry the most dangerous cargo. Teach knew better. He knew that the most dangerous thing on the ocean was not size. It was not firepower. It was certainty. The absolute, unshakable certainty communicated through smoke and speed and silence and a burning flag. That resistance was not just dangerous, but pointless. The Revenge taught him that. And what he learned on those planks, he carried with him until the moment he took 25 wounds and refused to fall. Next time you see a small ship on the horizon, something fast, something low in the water, something that shouldn't be there, remember what Edward Teach understood. Sometimes the smallest shadow casts the longest ghost. If this story found you, if the history that gets buried is the history that interests you most, then you're exactly where you belong. Subscribe to Bilge Bound, because next time we're going after something the historians have been quietly arguing about for decades. The Buzzard's treasure, $1 billion in gold, a map thrown into a crowd, and the question that nobody has answered in 300 years. That story is already waiting for you.